Welcome back to Epic Exchanges. I am thrilled today to welcome another guest from another continent. We've been getting a few of those this year. And we have Bill Lee Emery here with us today. Bill, why don't you introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm from Australia, and we're in the middle of summer here, so it's very, very warm. In fact, I think it's going to be like 32 degrees today. C. That's pretty hot.
Yeah.
My background and why really I'm here, I suppose, is because in August of 2022, I was diagnosed with throat cancer. Now, I'm 74. I've been fit and healthy all my life. I've never spent a night in hospital. I don't even take Aspros if I get a headache. I'll drink water, use acupuncture points. So for me to get a diagnosis of throat cancer was something of a shock. And when I was sitting in one of the waiting rooms, so I had a 7-week stint of radiation and chemo. And you'll notice through this interview, I'll be drinking lots and lots of water because I have to keep my throat, clean, clear. And I was sitting in the waiting room, and I was listening, kind of really help hear these stories of people around of what they were going through. And I realized that I actually had an advantage over many people that I met in the waiting room and through that whole process. And the reason for that is for the last 40 years, I've been working with mindfulness, mental and emotional resilience. So there's a whole swag of things that I knew that the person sitting next to me probably didn't. And I could tell that because, and I know, Kelly, you're into stories, and I would hear some stories that people were telling about their diagnosis and what it meant for them. And and sometimes we all have the capacity. I have the capacity. Everyone has the capacity to sometimes take something that's this big and turn it into something way bigger than it has to be. Now, I'm not denigrating or discounting a diagnosis of cancer, but I also do know, and in my world, that as Shakespeare said in Hamlet, there is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So this event in my life was either going to be a curse or a blessing, and I could choose which one it was going to be. And it was not going to be a curse. So if it was going to be a blessing, then how on earth would that show up as a blessing? I actually saw a friend of mine who had stage 4 prostate cancer outside the clinic. And he said to me, it's really weird, Bill, but this has been such a blessing for me. And I'm going, wow, okay. You've got stage 4 prostate cancer and you're telling me that this is a blessing for you, then heck, I can go with this thing of it being a blessing. So my whole paradigm around how this was going to be for me, because I would, tell some friends of mine, I have this diagnosis. And for some people, like, oh my God, no, that's horrible, that's terrible. And I'd say, well, it's not horrible, it's not terrible, it's what it is, it's a diagnosis. And in my condition, I've got a good chance of success if I do the right things. So I was very aware that people's own narrative about cancer, they would portray that on top of my experience. So I became very good at being very clear about my boundaries, about what I let into my head, but what also other people's influences and their stories around cancer or any other serious illness. So I became my own gatekeeper, and that proved to be invaluable. My oncologist, my radiation oncologist, his name is Sid. Everyone calls him Sid, but his full name is Siddhartha. And I'm going, wow, Siddhartha, as in, you mean like Prince Siddhartha? Prince Siddhartha who became Buddha. I've got Buddha as my radiologist. And he smiled because probably not many people would make that link. So all the medical staff would say to me, Bill, you're amazing. You're doing exceptionally well. Now, I had no parameters around what they meant by amazing, whether just being, encouraging. So I asked them, so what do you mean by when you say that I'm doing amazingly well? She said, well, in 17 years of clinical practice, she had never seen anyone in my condition and in my stage of health, etc., age, go through this as well as you have done. And Sid, at the end, when we were doing a post-treatment review, he said, Bill, you're not normal. And he meant that in a really nice way. So I realized all that 40 years of training in mental and emotional disciplines that I put into practice. And that's really why I'm here, because I've learned, you might know the expression of squeezing the lemon. So something happens and you want to squeeze the experience and get every little bit of juice, of wisdom, of insight that is shareable to other people. Because cancer, unfortunately, is it's not slowing down. It's getting worse and worse and worse because of our environment, because of a whole bunch of different things. But it's how we deal with anything. And I picked up part of your story about your sister and her condition, and how you just got on with things. But for some people, you know, an event like this can make them absolutely crumble in and fall apart. But for other people, and through all the millennia of humans telling stories, there have always been stories of something tragic that's happened to someone and they've made something from it. So that's really, you know, sure, I have my background, corporate training, et cetera, but it's really my lived experience with cancer that for me is a blessing. It's a gift. And that's really what I'm here to share.
Well, thank you. So for the first question I know anybody listening is going to have is where's your health right now?
Ah, okay, yes, of course. So it's been a year, a bit over a year now, and every 3 months I go and they stick tubes down my nose and down my throat and have a look. So they do it every 3 months. And at the end of my treatment, they gave me a PET scan to see if there was anything left. And because that was clear, they said, okay, you don't have to have any more PET scans, but we'll check you every 3 months. So they'll do that every 3 months for the first 2 years. After 2 years, there's an 85% chance that it won't come back. But they test me over a period of for 5 years until then they go, yep, it's done. Now, in my mind, every one of those milestones, I'm going to be leaving and I'm going to be boring to my doctors. Go, yeah, here you are again, Bill. Yep, all good. Off we go. And that's the way that I am using my imagination to help my body. So, and if I can just mention that, I realized early on that every time I would, and I wouldn't do this very often, if I catastrophize my condition, thought about, oh my God, is this the end of my life? Is this, you know, all those kind of things, then I would put a lot of emotional stress on my body. Now, my body had a lot to deal with the chemo and the radiation. It had a shitload of stuff it was going to have to deal with and process. I didn't need to dump a whole bunch of mental and emotional crap onto my body that had enough to deal with. So I became very clear with what, you know, my narrative about what I allowed inside my head. And that was a skill that I've been using for 40 years. So it wasn't just something that I'd learned. And the thing is, there are shortcuts. Anyone can learn how to do this. You don't have to wait 40 years before you can do this stuff.
Right. I would say it was probably second nature for you. Um,
Yes.
there are several things that struck me as you were sharing your story, and a lot of it comes down to choice. The
Yes.
choice that we have if we're given a diagnosis like yours, or with my sister-in-law and her locked-in state and our whole family, it's the choice that anybody has of how to continue living life, and how much to let it affect, and to look at it, as you said, as a blessing or a curse. When I work with people with their stories, usually it's after a big event has happened or it's looking back. And I like to tell people that, you know, when you've done sufficient healing, when you've done the work and everything, you actually look at it as a blessing because you've learned a lesson, you have a gift that you wouldn't have had otherwise. But to be proactive and intentional at the beginning is a whole different thing. So what would you say, like, how does one do that? How does one make that choice? I know it's not easy.
Yeah. And it's interesting if I go back to like beginner's mind of when I first learned that everything in life, every event is innocent, it's meaningless. But as human beings, we are compelled to make meaning out of every single thing that happens to us. And if we're conscious about the meanings, then we can influence how that rolls out in our life. So when I first came across this, I was thinking, and let's say I was upset with my girlfriend. She did something, said something, whatever it might be. And then I'd ask myself, so what's the meaning that I'm making about what she just said and what she's done? And it was just little things like that. And I was working with a client, and they were going through not dissimilar to my own condition. And I helped them to go, well, so this has happened. What are you telling yourself about what's happened? What are you telling yourself about what it means to you, what it means to them, what it means to a whole variety of different things? And just on very, very simple things, people can do this. Your listeners can do this. Someone says something to you and you get a bit miffed. So what are you telling yourself about that? What's the meaning that you're making? And this is the thing that was a real kicker for me. When I learned this through my mentor, he said to me, the meanings, so there's, if you've got a meaning here, then underneath that there's a deeper meaning, and you can keep on going down until you get to a real core meaning about what it means. And he said to me, Bill, it doesn't matter whether that meaning is true or not. He said the real question is the meaning that you're making useful? So I kind of sat there in a bit of a daze as I processed this. Because, what's true and what isn't. You can argue about that till the cows come home. So the key thing I'd come back to, once I realized what the meaning was, and go, is this meaning actually useful to me? And if it is, I'd keep it. But if it wasn't, then I would challenge myself and go, what would be a more useful meaning in this context that I can apply? Because ultimately, in my world, my life is lived from the inside out. Whatever I do on the inside will be reflected on the outside. I can't control what happens in the outside world, but I do have some influence, some agency about what I do with that. And this is age-old human wisdom. It's been around for way longer. I mean, it's been around for millennia, since we've been in caves drawing, things on walls. It's what we do with it. So no matter what our condition is, it's what we do with it that counts. And we can start with small things. And that's what I would teach my clients. Start with small things. Move up until something maybe more bigger happens, but you've got the skills because you've been building that little mind muscle, if you like. And that's really what it takes. Little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit.
Right. You mentioned that you have 40 years of lived experience and study and practice. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, I'll tell you how I got started. And I worked in the computer industry. This was way back in the 70s. And I got a job as an operations manager. And I should have known better. 5 people had been through that job in the last 2 years. I discounted that because I wanted the job. I'd just come back from traveling and I wanted the money. So I took the job. And after 3 months, I was waking up with a knot in my stomach and going to bed with a knot in my stomach. This job was killing me. And a friend of mine, a counselor, said, Bill, they're not paying you enough to die. And I went, they're not. So I quit. I quit the complete industry. And I went to find out what would really make my heart sing. So I stumbled into one thing, which was actually clinical hypnosis. And then from there, I studied transactional analysis, Gestalt therapy, NLP, a whole variety of different modalities. And accelerated learning, I learned how to teach people how to learn faster, which is very useful now in terms of what I'm doing with my lived experience with cancer and how to help people understand those concepts, but learn it in bit by bit. So I started doing public programs. I started doing corporate work. I worked with some elite athletes. I worked with the Australian national skydiving team. They were a hoot. They jumped from 16,500 feet, which is a long way up. We were with them for 10 days and we did 14 jumps, my business partner and I, in 10 days. One day we did five jumps on 6,500 feet, 3 before lunch. My adrenals were absolutely shattered. But I learned a lot about living on the edge, literally living on the edge. And these guys were just crazy amazing. So we were able to work with them and help them refine what they were doing at a very small, infinitesimal way. But those changes would make huge changes in how they did their competing. So I've worked with golfers and worked with triathletes, world champions, etc. So I've worked with a lot of people that they have to be mentally tough. And, when I was working with some cyclists, they've all got trees like legs like thighs like tree trunks, or all shaven, of course. But the real difference is what they do mentally, very subtly, but it makes such a big difference. So that's really how I got into all of this. And when I bring all that experience into my lived experience with cancer, I have to say all those things, every single bit of it, I was going to use at the absolute nth degree, every single bit that I learned.
Right. What would you say was the most challenging aspect of your cancer journey?
Gosh. Well, one was I lost my taste buds. I just get fried, and swallowing becomes like, imagine that you're swallowing razor blades. That's what swallowing becomes like. I lost my appetite. I lost my taste. Food became cardboard. My partner is a very good cook, and I'm going there, it's blah. And it took me a long time for my taste buds to come back. They're still not quite as they were. But probably one of the hardest physical things I had to experience was when you have throat cancer, they give you the option of having a feeding tube, which is basically 20 centimeter little pipe that goes into your belly. So that if you can't swallow, at least they can put food into directly into your belly so you can live. And no food, you're dead. So it's basically an operation, they knock you out, put the tube in, and then they send you home. And as they're sending me home, they said, so Bill, here are some hardcore painkillers that you may need, or just take a couple of Panadol. Well, good old hippie me, I'm going, well, I'll just take one Panadol. So it's a bit like this. Imagine that you hadn't done any body crunches before, and you're going to do 100 ab crunches in a row, or maybe even 200, and then you're going to try and lie down.
Yep.
Yep, got that.
Yep.
So I didn't want to take the hard drugs because I don't do hard drugs. So I took one Panadol, and one Panadol is like farting in the face of a cyclone, excuse the expression, but it did absolutely nothing for the pain, extreme pain in my belly. I was crying with pain. And the worst thing was seeing Julie, my partner's face, as she saw the pain that I was going through. So in terms of physical things, that was one of probably the hardest things. And then I went to see my naturopath, and she said to me, Bill, just take the drugs. It's a short period of time. I know you don't like taking drugs, etc., but just do the things that your body needs right now, and then we'll mop up after treatment, which is what we did. Pardon me.
Right. I'm encouraged. I love the fact that the hardest part for you was actually the physical pain part rather than the mental part of the whole journey, which it is for a lot of people. But you'd already kind of done all that work, so it made a big difference.
It did. I mean, there's still challenges. I remember one day sitting out the deck, and Julie could see that I was obviously, there were highlights and there were low times for sure. And I was doing an internally dark time. And she said to Bill, just make sure you take care of your own narrative. And really what I was doing, I was slipping back into an old habit of, poor me, how long is this going to go on for? Because it's a sprint, a 7-week sprint, but it's intense. It's very intense. The chemo, the radiation is very intense. So I was having kind of a dark moment. So it wasn't all, rainbows and unicorns, I got to say. But I'd had the training. I'd had the training in mental and emotional things. And I would let myself feel things like all the emotions, the up and down, but I wouldn't hang on to them. I'd let them go. And that, I think, made a big difference. So I wouldn't be bombarding my body with chemicals that it didn't need. It had enough input from the chemo and the radiation without me doing some internalizing stuff that wasn't going to be helpful.
Right. Why is it important for you to share your story?
Well, that's a really good question. I guess for the last 40 years, when I found something that I found to be personally valuable, I'm almost compelled to share it. When I learned about how to learn, when I learned about mental and emotional disciplines, when I learned about communication skills. So I've been running workshops for like 40 years. And when I find something, I have to share it. So when this happened to me, I've written 5 nonfiction books, by the way. And so when I was going through this, Julie said to me, "You're going to write a book, aren't you?" And I thought, and I was going to write a book, but every time I thought about it, in a sense, I would go back to some of those darker times. And I'm going, I could write a book, sure, but a book you can give someone and they read it, but people can be, I don't know if you heard the expression, overread and underdone.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to have a book sitting around on someone's desk or their table that could help them unless they applied it. So that's why I decided to create an online a membership where people are drip fed little bits of information and they have to do something to get to the next bit. So
Right.
it's kind of like, and it's layered. It's not like if I dumped all the stuff that I know into a book, it'd be way too much. And one of the things I know through going through my own treatment was energy was at a premium. Especially after chemo, my energy would dive down. And I would just love to have my energy. I'm a fairly high energy person. And to have my energy taken away was just like, what am I going to do? It's like when people don't have any coffee for a couple of days. What are they going to do without the coffee? What am I going to do without my energy? So I wanted to make sure that people weren't overwhelmed and they were given a lot of encouragement to take the next step, the next step, the next step, and to put things into action. So
Right.
my sharing is my compulsory. I find something really neat, I'm going to tell people about it. That's just how I've been for the last 40 years. I don't think I'm going to change.
Not going to change. If someone is listening to our discussion right now and they just received their own diagnosis or a loved one did, what are the first 3 things that you would recommend to them to approach it
Yeah.
all in the best way possible?
So the first thing I come back to is it going to be a curse or is it going to be a blessing? And for them to, get someone to help them process that and to make the decision of which one it's going to be, because it's pretty much going to be one or the other. And the more conscious we can be about it, then we can make a more informed choice.
Mm.
The second thing is around structure. Um, structure is everywhere in nature. So I had 40 years of structure around mental and emotional disciplines. So if people look at the structure, which includes the story that they're telling themselves, the story that other people around them are telling, all those kind of things creates a structure. And if they know how to create a healthy structure, that structure by default will help them manage through it and deal with it. And I guess the third thing, and I haven't really mentioned this, but I'll mention this now. When Julie and I sat down, we're going, okay, it's going to be a blessing. How's it going to show up? We thought about, well, we're going to need some help. We're going to need help with government departments, health departments. We want human angels to show up. And human angels are everywhere, just people with kindness. So if we're going to have a difficult discussion with a government department, whatever, we'd go, we want a human angel to show up. And lo and behold, they're everywhere. So we would just ask and go, wow. And we'd say to ourselves, well, that's not a human angel. So, and it was, of course. And we live in an eco village and community around us. People would show up with things totally unexpected. One day, Julie was saying, oh, I really love a pumpkin pie. And one of our neighbors, 2 days later, arrived on our doorstep with a beautiful pumpkin pie. We're going, if we're open to receiving, it's there. So that's the other thing, is be open to good things happening. Despite what your diagnosis is or how things are rolling out, be open to good things happening. Then you're more likely to spot them when they do.
Right. That's such great advice. If listeners, no matter their situation, only took one thing away from our conversation, what do you hope that is?
Be deliberate in your choices. Now I go back to curses and blessing. Be deliberate, be conscious. Don't let this be an unconscious process. Be fully aware of what's going on and make wise choices.
Right. What a great full circle moment. It is about the choices that we make every day. How can people find out more about what you're doing, how to work with you, learn from you?
So probably the best thing right now is just to go to my LinkedIn profile, just look for my name, you'll find me on LinkedIn. There'll be other links there to my membership site, which I'm just starting, and that's brand new. And that's so if I could just mention this, one of my mantras right at the beginning was I want to heal through it and thrive from this experience. So
Mhm.
my program is all around healing through it and thriving from it. So I don't want to be a survivor. I want to be a thriver, and I want to help other people. Maybe find it might be a wake up call for some people. It's a wake up call for me in some ways. And how can we, no matter what kind of diagnosis that we have, how can we thrive for every single thing that happens in our life? And that's really what I want to share.
Well, thank you for that. We will include all your links that you give us and make sure that listeners know when your website, your membership site is ready, that they have that link as well. One last fun question to wrap things up. You said you're not going to write a book about this, but if a book or a movie were done about your story, your journey, what would it be called?
Uh, I made it. I made it. That would be,
Perfect.
yeah, I made it.
And you did. Thank you, Bill, so much for sharing your story with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kelly.